Today's video is brought to you by SlideBelts, creators of high-quality belts featuring unique ratcheting buckles. Not only do they make my personal favorite belt, the survival belt, but they're also longtime viewers of the channel. I've personally used SlideBelts for some time now, and they honestly make a fantastic product. It also makes a great gift since you can buy one size and trim it to fit. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video for a special discount code for my viewers, redeemable at slidebelts.com. The story of the Second Age is a story driven by its villain. His attempts to conquer Middle-earth would take the form of secret infiltration, outright war with overwhelming strength of arms, and the manipulation of an entire kingdom to its destruction. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the life of Sauron in the Second Age. While this topic was covered in one of my first videos here on the channel, I realized that that video was incredibly condensed given the importance of this character and this time period. So today we're doing an all-new extended edition look at the Dark Lord. At the start of the Second Age, Sauron has just experienced the massive defeat of his master in the War of Wrath. He is told by Eowyn, the leader of the Host of the West, that he should go to Valinor and be judged for his actions if he truly wished to repent. Instead, Sauron flees, hiding in the lands of Middle-earth. 500 years later, Sauron comes to the conclusion that the Valar have turned a blind eye to Middle-earth. He realizes that he can continue his master's work, becoming the new Dark Lord. Sauron begins to work in the east and the south, among the people who had been influenced by Morgoth centuries earlier. Preying upon these old alliances, he finds followers who fall under his shadow. By 882 of the Second Age, Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, senses a shadow rising in the east. He sends a warning to Numenor. Though the Great Darkness had been defeated centuries earlier in Beleriand, a new power is rising, and they must prepare for an eventual war. Around 1000 of the Second Age, Sauron is alarmed at the growing power of the Numenorians. Knowing he must create a stronghold of his own, he chooses the lands of Mordor and begins the construction of Barad-dur near Mount Doom. Always a master at manipulation, Sauron must decide who next to pursue, the elves of Eriador or the men of Numenor. Despite knowing that men were easier to sway, he decides on the elves due to their innate power. He lies hidden for 200 years, all the while increasing his power. Finally, in 1200 of the Second Age, he puts on a fair visage with which to trick the elves. He calls himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. Traveling to Eriador, he claims to be an emissary from the Valar themselves. He wishes to infiltrate Lindon, as it is the greatest and mightiest of the Elven realms and home of the High King. However, Gil-galad and Elrond do not trust this mysterious entity. While they cannot perceive his true identity, they do not trust him and refuse him entry into their realm. Instead, Annatar comes to another elven realm in Eriador, Eregion. There he is gladly received by the Lord Celebrimbor. We are told that among the people of Eregion, Galadriel alone held distrust for Annatar. However, Celebrimbor is swayed by this Lord of Gifts. The Elven Lord leads the Gwaith y Myrdain, the Brotherhood of Jewelsmiths, and from Annatar, they learn much in both art and magic. Sauron, who was once a servant of Aule, the smith of the Valar, leads the Gwaith y Myrdain to become the greatest smiths of the age. It is said that Celebrimbor became more skilled than any smith to ever live, save for his grandfather, Feanor. By 1500 of the Second Age, after studying under Annatar for nearly 300 years, the Gwaith y Myrdain have reached the pinnacle of their skill and begin forging the Rings of Power. For Annatar had promised them that these rings would help preserve their realms and powers over Middle-earth. After 90 years, the first 16 rings of power are completed. At this time, Annatar takes his leave from Eregion, traveling back to Mordor. There, in 1600 of the Second Age, he creates the One Ring, a master ring, into which he pours most of his own power, so that he may control the bearers of the other rings. The ring is inscribed with the iconic phrase, Aj-naj durbatuluk, Aj-naj gimbatul, Aj-naj trakatuluk, Agburzumishi kripatul. In one of his first acts using the ring, he completes the construction of Barad-dur, binding the very foundations of the Dark Tower to the One Ring. However, the elves would perceive his deception as the Dark Lord places the ring upon his finger. Celebrimbor and the other elves are immediately aware of him, realizing they had been betrayed. Celebrimbor locks the 16 within a vault in Eregion, and sends the 3 rings, which he had made himself after Sauron's departure, to Gil-galad in Lindon and Galadriel in Lorien. Above all others, Sauron covets the 3 rings. He demands that the elves give to him all the rings of power. The elves refuse, and the war of the elves and Sauron is now inevitable. Next, Sauron builds the Black Gate of Mordor to prevent invasion into his lands, and begins amassing an army of orcs, trolls, and men who had come to worship him as a god-king. We are told that despite finding many followers among the Easterlings and Southrons, there are still those who oppose him. Due to their resistance, and possibly thanks to the work of the Blue Wizards, it takes Sauron much longer than expected to raise his army. Finally, 95 years after the creation of the One Ring, Sauron launches his war upon Eriador. As Eregion comes under attack, Gil-galad sends an army commanded by Elrond to aid the elves, while also calling for aid from Numenor. After 2 years of bloody conflict, the capital of Ost-in-Ethil is sacked, Celebrimbor is captured, and the realm of Eregion is laid waste. Sauron has Elrond and his forces cornered and facing their own destruction, when the dwarves of Khazad-dûm attack Sauron's rear flank, diverting his attention. Elrond leads the survivors, including Galadriel's husband Celeborn, north, where he would found the refuge of Rivendell. The dwarves retreat and shut the gates of Moria, which would not open from the outside again until the time of the Fellowship. Sauron tortures Celebrimbor, and while he would claim the 16 rings, or 15 depending on the version of the story, from the vaults of Eregion, Celebrimbor would not divulge the location of the 3 elven rings. The Elf Lord is killed, and his body placed on a spike and used as a war banner as Sauron continues his brutal war. By 1699, Sauron has conquered nearly all of Eriador, and the elves in Lindon and Rivendell are facing a vast and powerful army seeking their destruction. At this moment, Sauron's control over Middle-earth is as vast as it will ever be. At no time before or after would he rule over such a large area. As the situation is at its most dire, the Numenorians answer Lindon's call. They reinforce the elves and drive Sauron back from the front lines along the river Lune. Sauron retreats to Sarn Ford, where he is defeated again. He retreats further to Tharbad, where he is reinforced from the southeast. However, Sauron was not aware of a second fleet sent by Numenor's king to the mouth of the Gwathlo. This force attacks from the southwest, while Gil-galad and the other Numenorians attack from the north. Sauron's army is decimated, and the Dark Lord barely escapes himself. By the time Sauron returns to Mordor, he is left with just a small personal guard. Gil-galad defeats the cut-off forces laying siege to Imladris, and Sauron's defeat in Eriador is complete. While Sauron's might would never again equal what it was during his conquest of Eriador, his enemies have been decimated as well. so he faces no immediate threat. He holds a deep hatred for the Numenorians, those who had snatched away his ultimate victory. Eventually, he would turn his attention to the island realm, using other means than strength of arms. Still possessing the 16 rings of power, all of which were originally intended for the elves, Sauron decides instead to target the other races of Middle-earth. 7 rings come to the Dwarven lords, who would prove too hardy to be enslaved by the one. The 9, however, are given to men, 3 corrupted lords of Numenor, an Easterling king named Khamul, and 5 other men whose identities are a mystery. While initially becoming great rulers, warriors, and sorcerers, the 9 would fade, and in 2251, they first appear as the ringwraiths, the greatest of Sauron's slaves. Over 1,500 years after his defeat in Eriador, Sauron is confident that he will again rise to great power and dominate all of Middle-earth. Sauron declares himself King of Men, Lord of the Earth, and many similarly boastful titles. By this time, Numenor has fallen under a shadow, its leaders becoming oppressive and cruel, and most of the people turning their backs upon the Valar and the Eldar. Sauron's titles offend one of the most evil of all Numenor's kings, Ar-Pharazôn. In 3262, Ar-Pharazôn lands a great fleet at the haven of Umbar and marches to Mordor. So great was the splendor of Numenor that Sauron's armies flee and desert him. Knowing he cannot match Numenor with military might, he again takes his fair form, surrendering to Ar-Pharazôn. Sauron is taken back to Numenor as a captive, but as we see time and again, the Dark Lord has far more dangerous weapons than brute strength. He quickly goes from prisoner to the king's chief advisor within that very year. Sauron seduces the king with his words, turning him further away from the Valar and toward his Dark Master. "It is he whose name is not now spoken, for the Valar have deceived you concerning him, putting forward the name of Eru, a phantom, devised in the folly of their hearts, seeking to enchain men in servitude to themselves. For they are the oracle of this Eru, which speaks only what they will. But he that is their master shall yet prevail, and he will deliver you from this phantom. And his name is Melkor, Lord of all, giver of freedom, and he shall make you stronger than they." Known as Zigur the Wizard, the Dark Lord convinces the king to cut down the sacred white tree, and in its place they build a great temple for the worship of Morgoth. There he serves as the high priest of the cult of Melkor, practicing human sacrifice among both slaves and the Numenorians faithful to the Valar. Finally, in 3310, Sauron convinces an aging Ar-Pharazôn that the only way that he can avoid death, the doom of man, is to take the lands of the Valar by force. For the next 9 years, Ar-Pharazôn and the evil Numenorians construct the Great Armament, the mightiest naval force ever assembled. As Ar-Pharazôn sails for Valinor, Sauron remains behind in the Temple of Melkor. As the Numenorians land in Valinor, Eru himself intervenes, breaking the very world. Pharazôn and his army are buried under the earth, and Numenor is plunged into the sea. Sauron is caught in the destruction of the island, and while his body is destroyed, his spirit endures. Despite being weakened, his spirit flees back to Middle-earth in 3320. Once again, he sets to work, slowly but surely regaining his strength. However, from this point on, he is no longer able to take his fair form. With this development, he abandons his attempts to manipulate in order to gain power, and instead seeks to rule through terror and force, truly becoming the next great Dark Lord. Some of the evil Numenorians who had lived in places like Umbar survived the downfall, becoming known as the Black Numenorians and remaining loyal to Sauron. Meanwhile, those among the faithful also survive and found the realms of Gondor and Arnor. These people of Elendil remain Sauron's most hated enemies, and in 3429, he launches an attack in an attempt to prevent them from growing too great in power. Driven from his city of Minas Ithil, Isildur reports to his father in the north. There, Gil-galad would once again ally with the men of Numenor in working against Sauron, forming the last alliance of elves and men. Hearing of this new threat, Sauron sends orcs from Mordor to the Misty Mountains in an attempt to ambush the army. He also burns the gardens of the Entwives in an effort to slow the army's march to Mordor. Despite these moves, the last alliance reaches the Black Gate in 3434, where they are victorious in the Battle of Dagorlad, the very battle that resulted in the Dead Marshes. For the next 7 years, Sauron's tower of Barad-dur is under siege. Finally, in 3441, Sauron himself comes forth to face his enemies in combat. The Dark Lord drives back the last alliance to Mount Doom. Elendil and Gil-galad, the mighty kings of the men and elves, fight Sauron upon the slopes of Orodruin. Elendil and Gil-galad would succeed in vanquishing the Dark Lord, yet the deed would cost both their lives. Coming up to Sauron's fallen body, Isildur, the son of Elendil, cuts the One Ring from his finger, claiming it as his own in recompense for his fallen father and brother. Sauron's spirit would once again flee, this time to the east. It would take the Dark Lord 1,000 years to return to the western lands of Middle-earth. Without his ruling ring, his path to regaining a body would be slow. And as we enter the Third Age, we find a Sauron who uses his servants to fight his battles, as he seeks to isolate and destroy those who would oppose him, all the while coveting the return of his One Ring. Darkness may come when we least expect it, which is why I love the survival belt from SlideBelts. Not only does it feature an LED flashlight for dark moments, but also a stainless steel knife, a fire starter, and a bottle opener. Combined with the convenience of SlideBelts' ratcheting buckle, it helps me feel a bit more like a modern-day ranger. And right now you can save 20% off your order with the code NERDOFTHERINGS. For some of the best belts you'll ever find, go to slidebelts.com. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Mandu Pandu, Andrew Carlisle, The Mighty Mim, Sky Carcass, SlideBelts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.